Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we will explore Connector API. We'll take a look how to use globals, data, how to load custom Node.js modules, and also how to use log function. We will check common data types and how to use them, and how to use global and authentication parameters within the connector code. Let's start with required helper function, and let's check when to use the native Node.js required and when to use Bizagi required. Main difference is that in the Node.js there are several built-in modules, and when you use those, you need to use native require function to load the module. As example, if you use popular Axios library, then you can use it with required. It will give you some additional benefits, as example caching. But be aware that built-in Node.js modules, as example popular HTTPS, will not work with the required, and you need to rely on native require functionality. In short, if you use third-party modules, use Bizagi helper function required, and if you use native modules, use Node.js provided require function. Next, let's take a look at the globals object. It will contain important properties, as example connector name, connector version, which is important if you are supporting multiple connector versions. You can also add certificate in the system configuration, and if it's added, then you will get it in the connector in the base64 format. If you're using proxy and it's set up in the Bizagi Studio, then in the custom connector under proxy object, you can get all the attributes. Next important part of the global object is system properties. System properties will contain all the attributes which you have specified in your connector globals object. As example, API URL, environment type, timeout settings, or any other parameter which you want to configure separately per each environment. Type of the setting always will be string, but you can define predefined list which allows you to select specific value in the connector system configuration. You can also define is it mandatory or optional attribute, but if you have set up that it's optional attribute, make sure to implement relevant logic in your connector code. Auth object will be passed only if you are using custom authentication. It will contain two types of the values. Ones which will come from your connector system configuration, and all the secrets will be already in the encrypted format. And most important, if you are using separate authentication server, which is implemented within Auth.js file, then all the attributes returned by the Auth.js invoke function will be accessible from auth data object, as example token. And the last one is impersonalization token. I haven't used it, but it will work only if enabled in the system configuration and only if you are using specific authentication type for your work portal. To use globals within your connector code, you just need to specify the variable, and you can define the value or access it through the globals.systemProperties.key name, as example base URL. Same is with authentication data. You can access it through the globals.authData.value of your authentication key. And in the same way, you can access any other attribute from the global object. Most important is to be aware what kind of attributes are available and understand that part of those will be added from the authentication invoke function. Next, let's look at the data objects. These are defined per each connector action, and structure is specified in the actions input section, where you define both attributes and their data types. Values later will be populated from the process instance. Bizagi supports various data types. The most common is string and integer. You can also define complex objects. For example, address object might contain multiple sub-attributes as street, city, and postal code. To configure this, set the input type to single object and then add all the required sub-attributes within the address object. You can create multiple levels of nesting if needed, allowing an input structure to fully reflect your Bizagi data model. It's also possible to work with array of values. In this case, data object will represent list, but for this to work correctly, you need to configure in the input mapping following setup. First, change input type to object and select list option. Then in connector mapping, first you will need to map the collection and attribute from the collection which you want to populate in the array. You can use same approach when you need to specify multiple attributes from the collection. Just define the type as object, enable list option, and under the object define all the attributes which are needed. One limitation of connector editor is that once the structure is defined, it's not so easy to change it. However, in the upcoming videos, I will show you some practical ways how to get around this limitation. For numeric values, you can use decimal or double. For dates, use dedicated data type. And for files, use byte type. Keep in mind, numbers are always passed with decimals, but dates are sent in UTC format. So you might need to make some adjustments if your target system is expecting specific time zone. Files will be converted to base 64, which can increase file size for up to 30%. If you are working with many large files, remember that connector have limit on maximum file size. And finally, to access attributes from the data object in your connector logic, use the following format: input.input.name of your attribute. Next, let's look at how to create connector traces. I assume you're already familiar with the rule trace functionality in Bizagi Studio. In custom connector, you can achieve very similar result by using log helper. Log helper provides several logging options. The most commonly used ones are log.error to indicate that it's error-related trace, or log.info to log general information messages. You can pass either a string or an object to the log helper, and it will log the result in the traces. To enable connector traces, go to the management console, navigate to the connectors, external connectors, and enable the required trace level. However, keep in mind that Bizagi does not recommend using traces in production, as excessive logging can negatively impact connector performance. Even though log helper also supports other levels such as debug or warn, I usually stick to the error and info. In practice, all connector logs are written to the same log file anyway. For that reason, I strongly recommend always including case number in your log message. To write traces inside your connector action, simply use log, dot, required level of the traces, and pass string message or object. Another useful helper function is a required parameter validator. I usually use this function to make sure that all the mandatory attributes has been passed to the connector. This ensures that the connector has all the necessary information. And what is great with this function, you can pass key value to the required parameters, as example field A, and if the value is not provided, for example, it's not mapped by mistake, or it is missing in the Bizagi data model, then validator will return already preformatted error message, which you can use directly in the callback function. Now let's quickly recap how everything fits together. First, define the Node.js modules required by your connector, include any third-party libraries. Next, define globals used within the connector action, then map the inputs coming from Bizagi case. After that, perform all the necessary input validations, and only once these steps are completed, you should proceed with the actual API call. In the next video, I will show you how to call the target system step by step. If you found this useful, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments what other topics I should cover.